All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at the Volume. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope all of you guys are having an incredible week so far as we head into this jam-packed NBA weekend. We have a very special show today. The guys from Nerd Sesh, Logan and Carson, are coming on. We're going to talk about all of the big-time scenarios that are taking place over the next few days. We have, first of all, our contender lists. And Logan and Carson released their contender lists on their show and also on Instagram the other day. And I was looking at it, and both of them have the Phoenix Suns completely off their list. So we're going to debate that, talk about a couple other things on their list, and then they're going to come at me about things that they disagree about with my list. Also, after that, we're going to talk about the top of the Eastern Conference in light of the Giannis injury. Are the Celtics just going to kill everybody, or is there a threat in there? We're going to talk about that. After that, we're going to look at the bottom of the Western Conference because the play-in tournament can go in a million different directions this weekend. We're going to dig into some scenarios and what we expect to see there. And then lastly today, we have one playoff series that is set in stone. Even the Eastern Conference is completely up in flux right now. But in the Western Conference, we are going to get the rematch of the rematch of Clippers versus Mavs. And we're going to just do a full-blown series preview, diving into that series tactically on both ends of the floor. And we will end that segment with us making our predictions. So without any further ado, Carson and Logan, I was shocked when I put my list together and I had Phoenix at 5, mainly just because they have 2 of the top 15 players in the league on their roster. And a center that can bang bodies with Nikola Jokic and give him some issues, and a ton of off-ball talent, including Bradley Beal, that can help space teams out. I think they're the best drive and kick team in the league, and so I'm higher on them than you guys, and I was stunned to see that teams like, let's just say, the Miami Heat were above them, and some other examples around the league. So you guys have an opportunity now to defend yourselves, and we'll start with you, Carson. Why are the Phoenix Suns not a top 10 contender for you?
Specifically on the question of the Heat, that is just a tough one because I do think that the Suns are better than Miami. I just kind of felt like if I leave the Heat entirely off of this top 10 list, just considering how they have defied their regular season results and how proven their playoff formula of elite defense, Jimmy somehow elevating to this legit offensive number one is, and I like their collection of wings and secondary creators more than last year. I felt like putting them in the 10 spot was sort of a happy medium between the team they've looked like this regular season and the team that we have seen them capable of ascending to, even though I think they were very fortunate in various respects in terms of last year's playoff run. But on the question of the Suns, I was surprised to see that you have them all the way up at 5. Like, I think that they belong right around that 10, 11, 12 range. They absolutely do scare me because they have Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, and just the pull-up shot making, the offensive skill that those guys are capable of putting forth as one of the best scoring duos that we have seen in the history of this league. Like, that is absolutely terrifying. And we saw it against the Nuggets last year. They were the team that was able to steal 2 games away just because those two, and especially Book, were so unconscious. They were so absurdly good as pull-up shooters that they were able to generate a sort of offensive success that even though the Nuggets were still getting theirs, it just outweighed that. But when I look at the scope of the West this year, I do think there's a lot of really strong teams. And I think there's a decent amount of teams that are a bit more complete at Phoenix. And if we sort of break them into different categories, if I compare them to like the skill-based teams where we have these huge jumbo-sized teams out west that are probably going to defend at a really high level and have these big physical advantages. And then we have the teams like the Thunder and the Clippers, where the Thunder are obviously uniquely small and slight. But the Clippers, although they play a traditional 5 like the Suns do, these are skill-based teams based on their perimeter shot creators. And in both the Clippers and Suns cases, it's not about like we have these super high-end athletes who are going to consistently generate this rim pressure. It's about the skilled shot making and shot creation of their wings. And I just think we have seen a much higher ceiling from the Clippers. I do think they have a different level of physicality just when you think about how Kawhi alone can impose himself in those environments. Even though they've been bad defensively for 2 months, they have shown a higher defensive ceiling, and I like their perimeter talent there. And Zubac's on the interior more, and I think they have the best player in that series. So I like LA more. I know you agree with that one, and I'm not as high on LA as you are. OKC, I just think is so much more proven defensively. They're so athletic on the perimeter. They're so pesky. They're so consistently dialed in there. Chet, obviously, his slightness is an issue. And we saw Nurk get his 30 boards against him because there's just such a massive strength advantage there. But I still think Chet's an elite pure rim protector. And then I like the formula that OKC has of multiple dudes who are just so hard to stay in front of. I think they're the best drive and kick team in the league just because of the consistent penetration that you get from J-Dub and Shea. And they have, I would say, a better three-point shooting cast overall, but also a higher volume three-point shooting cast. So I think there's a higher ceiling there. And then I prefer the Lakers. I think that their formula of two top 10 guys with the secondary shot creation we've seen with Rui in the starting five, they're huge. Their offense has been really good. And I think they clearly have a higher defensive ceiling if Vando is healthy. And I just like how their two top 10 players complement each other. AD dominates defensively. LeBron dominates offensively. They both impose themselves physically. The T-Wolves, I just think that defense is so great. So ultimately, it comes down to the fact that a lot of these teams have had their moments. They've had their stretches where you're like, boy, they look like juggernauts. The Clippers, when they went 26-6. The Lakers, even if it's been in shorter spurts, I would argue mostly post All-Star break and in the in-season tournament. The T-Wolves, the Thunder, these teams have just consistently won a whole bunch of games. Phoenix hasn't really had that stretch to me. And I think that they're going to be pretty average defensively, and they're going to ask their stars to take on a significant burden there just because of the nature of their roster composition. I think although Book and KD are so unbelievable as shot makers, and although they do have good complementary off-ball pieces, there's a reason this team is still 11th in offensive rating, and it's because they don't really have that ability to just break open a crazy ceiling because of the lack of high-end rim pressure from any of their stars, and because the fact that they aren't a high-volume three-point shooting team. So it may be the reality that these dudes can sit there and make 50% of their mid-range pull-up jumpers over you night after night, and that's good offense, but it's not great offense in the same way that some of these other teams with more physical advantages and higher shooter ceilings are. I don't love the depth here, and this team has just been so disastrous in fourth quarters on both sides of the ball. I think their offensive process has been bad. They've been sloppy. They've been super turnover prone. So the Suns are still an uncomfortable first round draw to me. Absolutely. But I don't view them as being in that contender tier because it's kind of like with their defensive limitations, with the fact that they haven't reached the offensive peaks that some of these other teams have, with the fact that they aren't the most physically imposing, it's tough for me to see them stringing together like series after series after series.
I think Carson hit on a few key points that I really agree with. On the Miami Phoenix point, when he's talking about these teams underperforming in the regular season, I do think Miami, just their track record, they've shown us that they can just turn around and flip a switch and be a completely different team in the playoffs. When I don't really see that with Phoenix. I think it's they've shown me too many red flags in the regular season. And I also think it's a fundamental roster construction issue. I think you're expecting role players to play above their means when I also don't love their depth. And then I think you're expecting stars to fill roles that they just aren't equipped to fill, where, like Carson said, you're going to ask these guys to go above and beyond defensively and on the glass and just fill things that they're not really equipped to do. The real issue that I have with Phoenix is their late game offense and just late game process in general. Like, they have been horrid in fourth quarters. They have been horrid in the clutch. They are 30th in fourth quarter offensive rating this season, 104.1. They're 22nd in fourth quarter defensive rating. They have the worst net rating in the fourth quarter of any team in the NBA, and they're 29th in turnover percentage. In the clutch, they're 23rd in offense. They're 14th in defense in the clutch. They're 19th in net rating in the clutch. And that, to me, is the real stain for Phoenix. Like, personnel-wise, you guys are right. Like, Big Nurk, KD, Beal, Book, these are guys that can really swing a series and swing games, but they just haven't shown it enough to me. Like, I'm really scarred by all the late game collapses that I've seen with Phoenix, where it's, I don't know, man, Eric Gordon trying to push the ball up in transition, and, Grayson Allen trying to do too much. And I am screaming at my television going, hey guys, can we get Devin Booker a touch? Like, I can't remember what game it was a couple weeks ago, but it's like the final 3 minutes, Devin Booker doesn't touch the ball on offense in the fourth quarter. And I don't know, there's that's my biggest issue is there's not like a hierarchy to this team where the role players really complement the team. And then, yeah, in late game scenarios, it's guys trying to do too much. It's them settling for mid-range jumpers. Like, the Suns just haven't shown it to me enough this season to where I can believe in them. And I trust that this is the Suns team that we're going to get. We're in fourth quarters. They play below their means. We're in the clutch. They perform like this team. I think there's a higher ceiling they can reach, but like I really just I think they've shown us who they are too many times in this regular season. And I don't think this is a switch issue where they can just effort and energy wise and just lock in. I think there's way more issues under the surface.
So I agree with a lot of what you guys are saying. They've been a Jekyll and Hyde team. They are the definition of a team that, like, when they play basketball the right way offensively, like advantage creation basketball, where their stars just look to get the defense in rotation and then they play drive and kick, they can be devastating. They've had stretches of games. They just recently played like a 5 or 6 straight top 10 defenses and had like a 70% assist percentage in those games, and they lit them all up. But then they'll lose sight of that sometimes, and they'll get sloppy. They struggle to handle ball pressure and traps and things along those lines. They're guys that they're guys that prefer to work in the action when they're comfortable. And then as soon as teams really kind of, again, like when you trap a team or double team a player, it's a good thing typically. And Phoenix is really good at capitalizing on that. The reason why I think they're a better drive and kick team than Oklahoma City is literally because of the fact that they're off ball. They don't have like a Josh Giddey or a Lou Dort. And Lou Dort shot the ball really well this year, but he can get a little tunnel vision when he's driving closeouts. And obviously Giddey is a guy that you typically are leaving open. When I try to think of the Suns within the scope of their best 5 players, which in my opinion, Suns fans disagree about this. Some of them think it should be Royce O'Neal. I personally think it should be Grayson Allen. But when they actually have, Booker, Beal, Durant, Allen, and Nurkic out there, you're closing out hard basically at everybody except for Nurkic. And Nurkic is such a connective piece in terms of his ability to make reads when he's left open and to quickly turn and pivot into dribble handoffs and stuff. When they play the right way, they can be very good. That Jekyll and Hyde piece is what I think gets people off of them. I agree as well as it pertains to the physicality, like Carson mentioned. Like, Phoenix has a tendency to get punched in the mouth and then struggle. But then I've also seen them rise to the physical challenge of Denver a few times too. And so like it comes to the point of that. Which team are they? Are they the high end version or are they the low end version? One of the things that I think people have to keep in mind is, like, for instance, in the Clippers game, Nurkic didn't play. Obviously, that's not an excuse to completely wipe that performance away. But more often than not this year, when they've been down guys is when they've looked bad. As a matter of fact, among all 5-man lineups in the NBA this year that played at least 400 minutes, the Durant, Beal, Nurkic, Booker, Allen lineup has been the 4th best in the entire league, outscoring teams by 10.3 points per 100 possessions and a 124 offensive rating, which is the 2nd best in the league to the classic starting 5 for Denver, which, by the way, a 126 offensive rating this season.
Good Lord.
Outscoring teams by 14 points per 100 possessions. So Denver just looking like a complete and total juggernaut. But again, the case there is, like, they're better than they've looked because when they're healthy, they tend to play a certain style and they've been better in those situations. They also have shown really good upside to me in some specific matchups. To me, getting out of the Western Conference, a prerequisite was Denver. And I almost, going into about a week and a half ago, I had Phoenix above Dallas. And what kind of flipped that dynamic for me was seeing Dallas hold up better physically in some tougher matchups. But, like, to me, that ability of Nurkic to just kind of make things a little tougher on Jokic, especially in the second Denver game, I thought Kevin Durant was unbelievable defensively in that game. And so when Nurkic is bodying Jokic and KD is bringing that kind of backline length that we know can be so devastating, they provide a little bit of a tougher matchup. The other thing too, Denver is a high drop and tag team for the most part. So what that means is they are pretty consistently leaving someone open on defense. And Phoenix is the type of team that can capitalize that on that in a way that some other teams can't. Like, they're a team that, like, when they actually handle pressure well and get rid of the ball to the right spots, they're really difficult to guard. And so the case, again, I agree with you. I have the Clippers above them. I have Dallas above them. But to me, the reason why I have them as high as I do is they match up well with Denver. And it really is that simple, in my opinion. All of these other teams, like as good as Dallas is, Jokic is going to eat their front line alive. You know what I mean? In a 7-gamer, right? Like as good as the Lakers are, Jamal Murray is going to eat their backcourt alive, right? As good as the Clippers are, they've consistently struggled with Denver and just their ability to pick them apart on offense. So like I understand where you guys are coming from. I just think pure talent, matchup advantages in the Western Conference, kind of sifting through some of their good and bad this year, I still view them as a significant and substantial threat. All right, so I got one more quick bone to pick with each of you guys, and we'll just go one-on-one for each of these real quick, and then I'll let you guys go after my list a little bit. So, Carson, you had the Timberwolves at 5, if I remember correctly.
I think I had them at 4.
Yeah, you had them way up.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching once again the Denver-Minnesota game last night, 2 nights ago. And I did a pretty extensive film session on it. And like, I just remain convinced that the Timberwolves are just not going to be able to score consistently when they get into these situations. And there are enough guys in their lineups that you can pick on the defensive end of the floor that you can find a way to score, which is why Minnesota's clutch time defense has been so bad. I'm just not very high on the Timberwolves. Where are you getting your optimism from?
So I think the Timberwolves are like maybe the most interesting team headed into the playoffs because they sort of contradict the various precedents that we have for successful playoff teams. The first box that it feels like you pretty much always have to check if you want to make a deep playoff run is having a tier 1 superstar guy. And I love Ant, but he's just not at that level yet. He's not consistent enough as a playmaker. He's not consistent enough as a pull-up shooter. He's just going to continue to refine his game, and he will ascend to that level, but he's not there yet. And along with that, you have to have a good offense and you have to have a good half-court offense. And that's a reason that I have been consistently out on a team like the Grizzlies in recent years because they just haven't produced in the half-court in the regular season. And then you get into the playoff environments and you see that their offensive skill level and half-court creation isn't quite up to the level of these other teams that maybe they're beating in the regular season. Some of the reasons I feel differently about Minnesota, number one, I don't think that they have enough offensive pop to beat Denver. Like, I definitely wouldn't pick it. I also think they make Denver more uncomfortable and defend them significantly better than anybody else. And so that alone is just a punch that nobody else can throw. Because it's so hard trying to figure out, how do you beat Denver? Is it you just go nuclear offensively, or you slow them down offensively enough? Nobody is taking away Denver being a damn good offense, but is it just we take away 7-8% of their production and then we can grind out enough to outpace that? And that's where I kind of view the Mavs as the best offensive threat, because Luka and Kyrie are going nuclear. That shot creation, to me, the ceiling there exceeds what the Suns would have in a similar mold. And then I do think Dallas has been defending better and matches up better physically. And then the T-Wolves are sort of the alternative, where it's just we grind this series down and make it ugly and defend them better than anybody else. And I do think that they're a pretty exceptional team defensively. The gap between them and the number 2 defense in the league right now in terms of defensive rating is the biggest that we have seen in 30 years. And entirely different NBA. Yeah. But the last team who had that big a margin was the 94 Knicks, who were a mediocre offense. They were 16th in offensive rating, and they still made the finals just on the back of how great that defense was. So again, different leagues, but generally that fundamental truth has always been the same. You have to produce offensively, and you have to do it in the half court. I just wonder if Minnesota is so great defensively, and they're so brutal for anybody to play, and they're so physically overwhelming. Like, that's the thing. They are going to win on the glass in these matchups. I think that defensively, they really have an answer for anybody because they have such hounds at the point of attack. They're so athletic there. They're so consistently dialed in, and they're physical. And then you have the best rim protector in basketball still, the best interior defender. I think Cat, his physicality as the 4 when he's back out there, what he can do as a post defender, like, I think he's improved substantially defensively. So they do violate that principle that you have to produce offensively, but it's kind of like, who do I think is going to score enough on them for that to matter? And it's probably Dallas, because I don't know you can really take away what they're doing when Luka is on this level and Kyrie is on this level. And then it's the Nuggets. Everybody else, I think Minnesota grinds their offense to a halt by enough to where they don't need to produce at like the level that we know these other teams are capable of in their ceilings, just because they've taken such a chunk out of their offensive productions.
Okay, I have one counter, and I'll give you a quick opportunity to counter
Okay.
that. I agree with you that their defense is a huge weapon, and I think it's going to keep every game close.
Mm-hmm.
But they suck in close games.
Sure, the clutch offense has been bad. The clutch offense has been bad, and like that is my red flag. But I also don't want to just like overlook how this defense has made them such a consistently great team. And it feels very different to me in terms of, oh, this is a team that is winning a bunch of regular season games than OKC, because both these teams have playoff red flags, but Minnesota just checks more boxes, more experienced, way more physical. And I think that defense as a problem really translates. But I don't disagree in my concern about the late game offense and the half court offense. However, I also think there will be games that like they win comfortably just because you can't score on them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I'm betting on. But I wouldn't be shocked if, say, they drew the Lakers, if they lost that first round series at all. Even the Suns, it's like if they go ice cold offensively, if Ant has a bad series, if Cat doesn't look like himself, like Minnesota could lose first round. I don't think the gaps are very big after Denver, but I believe in that defense. I think that defense translates, and I think they are going to suck to play.
There's a decent chance that we get Minnesota versus the Lakers in round one. We'll talk about some of the scenarios when we get to the play-in bracket, but because the Timberwolves have the tiebreaker over the Thunder, and they should both win out in theory, although the Timberwolves will have a tough game against the Suns. Like there's a good chance they end up at 2. And if things break right for the Lakers tonight, they should be at the 8 or the 7, which if they win that game, they would end up in that 7 seed facing off against Minnesota. And so that would be the interesting thing, is like, I just imagine LeBron and AD really, really baiting Ant into his limitations as a playmaker. And then just like, again, that Anthony Edwards versus Anthony Davis matchup in terms of like just kind of shutting off the paint. And again, like AD is always giving Gobert issues too. That's going to be an interesting series. I want to be clear too up front before we move on to Logan. I think we're splitting hairs for most of these. Like I told you guys that I had the Timberwolves at 9 and the Bucks at 8, but if Giannis misses the first round, there's like a really good chance they just don't make it out of the first round. And if that's the case, I'd move the Timberwolves up to 8, and I'd probably put the Sixers in at 9. I don't think that there's much of a gap at all between the Timberwolves and the Mavs. Like, it's an imperceptible gap to me. Like Dallas, the Clippers, the Suns, the Lakers, the Thunder, the Timberwolves, to me, they're all like neck and neck. And so like, you have them higher than I do. We're arguing about it, but it's not like we're that far apart in how much we perceive them as a threat. Logan, I have one for you. Carson, I think you had Miami at 10, correct?
Correct.
I had Miami at 10 as well, just an obligatory. I had them and the Warriors just kind of share that 10 spot as like like, we respect you, but
lifetime achievement.
A lifetime achievement award. So, and here's the thing with Miami for me. Jimmy's having a worse season than he did last year. Bam's having a worse season than he did last year. There's this perception, and it's understood, but there's this perception that the Heat like just come alive every postseason and go on a run. And they've been really good, but there also was 2021 when they went and just got swept. So like it like what ends up happening is, in my opinion, like they can expose somebody that is not a real championship contender. But when they run into a truly great team, they tend to lose. Who did they lose to in 2021? The team that won the title, right? 2022, they lost to that Celtics team that had a 2-1 lead in the finals. They lose to the Nuggets. Like, to me, they're basically like the bouncer at the club for the championship room. Like you gotta they're not good enough to actually beat any of those teams, but any team that runs into them that is fraudulent, they will expose. And so while I look at them as a legitimate threat to, like, let's say Milwaukee ends up at 2 and Miami ends up at 7, like, yeah, I view them as a threat, but I think putting them over some of the teams you have them above, Logan, I struggle with. Like, 7 is high. And like Bam still can't make anything around the basket. Yeah, I get it. He's making a few more threes this year than he did last year. But like
14.
I just but yeah, I don't necessarily view Miami as a substantial threat this year. So Logan, defend yourself. Why is Miami up at number 7?
Miami to me just has such a high floor that I can bank on. And I want to be clear too. I think Bam is the biggest swing factor for the Heat once again this postseason. What Bam brings them offensively is going to determine their ceiling, because it's ugly, man. Like, and it's frustrating with Bam because he's such a talented, like, athletic guy, but there's just possessions, man, in games to games where, like, I just don't ever think Bam's going to fully figure it out offensively, where it'll be early in the shot clock, man. And it's situational too, because some of these games it's without Jimmy or it's without Hero. So Bam already has this extra expected load on him, but he's taking a post turnaround fadeaway with 16 seconds on the shot clock. And it's like, Bam, that's not a good look. Bam to me is still the biggest swing guy for Miami. The reason they're so high for me, I know that I just said this about Phoenix, like their track record in the regular season, I'm not going to bank on it. But Miami has shown us that they are a different team when the playoffs come. And Jimmy Butler, despite him having another injury-riddled season, another, downtick in the regular season where he's not playing up to standard, Jimmy Butler is one of the greatest playoff risers of all time. I believe his career stats 26 or 24-6, 26-4, one of those stat lines. And the list of the guys to do that as efficiently as Jimmy has done is like one of 7 players. It's like Luka, KD, LeBron. The list is absurd. So my fundamental belief in Miami is that Jimmy Butler is going to turn into playoff Jimmy again, and he's going to do it. I just have this faith in Jimmy Butler that he's going to rise. And I know he's 35. I know he's getting up there in age, but Jimmy scares me. Jimmy scares me the way that a lot of other players in the playoff field don't, where he can exert this level of control on the game that other players can't, where he's getting into the teeth of the defense. He is setting up shots for his teammates. He is just grinding out these games and controlling them on both sides of the floor, where that's what he's doing offensively. And then defensively, this is one of the best duos, point blank period, on the planet, on how Jimmy can take away the opposing team's best perimeter creator. And then Bam on the inside is just a havoc wreaker. So I get a really high baseline with those two guys. I get Eric Spoelstra in that dark voodoo magic that he puts on other NBA teams. And then the crux for why I have this team higher than other contenders, I just think Miami's better than they've been in years previous. The Terry Rozier trade matters to me. Rozier may not be at his absolute apex here, but to me, he's a much better shot creator than they've had in years previous. You're asking Kyle Lowry and Gabe Vincent to play well above their means. I think Duncan Robinson has gotten better. Hopefully Tyler Hero is available. And then I think they're better on the wings. Like, I like Jovic. I really like Triple J. They're just a better team than last year. And last year they went to the finals. Now, as we all know, it took a bunch of outlier stuff for Miami to handle business. 45% in the first round against Milwaukee from deep, 43% against Boston. And Caleb Martin just went dumb, just turned into Andrew Toney for a series. It's the track record, man. I believe in Jimmy and Bam and Spo. I think they're a better team than last year. I think they've got more shot creation. I think their wing depth is better. I just think Miami's better than last year, and their defense gives me such a high baseline. And it's honestly the X factor for me. I think you're right, Jason. I don't view Miami as a real title contender. I don't think they can win the championship, but can they get to the Eastern Conference Finals on some BS again? Probably. I mean, they've done it before. Like, that's the thing about Miami, is that if you have one flaw, if you have that one, chink in your armor, Spo is going to find it, and he is going to pick, and he is going to prod, and he is going to find that, and he is going to pick at it the entire series. and decimate you with it. You cannot have a flaw where Miami is going to find it and expose it. And I do think some outlier things have to happen. If Jimmy has a bad series, the Heat are cooked. If the Heat shoot poorly from behind the arc, the Heat are cooked. They're probably going to get bounced in the first round. But Miami also has the advantage where, again, if you have that one fatal flaw, I think Miami can expose it better than other teams. So that's where I fall down on them. I don't really view Miami as a team that can win the finals, but I think any series they can beat a team. And I do think they can get back to the Eastern Conference Finals again this year. So look, guys, I'm just not getting burned again, man. I'm not going to, the Miami Heat are not going to go on a run again this year. And I'm not going to be the jackass that left them off my top 10 contenders list. So I'm never going to count Miami and Jimmy out, man. I believe in them too
That's
much.
what the 10 spot is for, Logan.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying. You had him at 6. You didn't have to go that far.
So I think we more or less agree, Logan. Like if I had a different contender list, which is like more likely to get out of the first round, like the Heat would be pretty high on that list because I agree with you. Like I have such a belief in Jimmy and Bam as kind of defensive weapons, and Eric Spoelstra's just schematic competence is like literally better than everybody in the league by a sizable gap. Like there's so many different elements that make them a threat, but like I would put them on the list of teams that will be in the playoffs this year that literally cannot win the title. Like they do not have the horses. Even if like one or two of the higher level contenders got eliminated, I just don't think they have the horses. Like even let's say Denver and Boston both got knocked out by some sort of fluke. One of these other teams, Dallas, the Clippers, the Suns, the Lakers, the Thunder, the Bucks, one of them is going to be a real team, in the postseason, and they just wouldn't be able to get through that. And like to me, like they got to the finals in 2020 and got fucking smacked. Like, yeah, there was a couple games there where Jimmy went crazy, but anytime the Lakers put their foot down on their necks, they had no chance. And they got blown out in 3 of the 6 games, I think. Like the last year in the finals, they had a really good performance in game 2 where they finally slowed down the Jokic Murray 2-man game, hit a bunch of threes, but they kind of got handled in every other game. Like even going back to the year they lost to Boston, like they lost to Boston and they dragged the series to 7, and yeah, Jimmy had a shot, but like if I remember correctly, the Celtics were up by like 3 possessions with like a minute and a half left, and it was just kind of classic Celtics that they toasted it off. And that also kind of felt like one of those series where like when the Celtics were BSing, the Heat would get them, and then when the Celtics would engage, they'd kind of control the game. So like I never have ever really viewed Miami as a team that was actually within reach of the trophy. And like they're older now, and Jimmy has gone down a tiny level from last year. I'm just not as high on them as everyone else is. So before we move on to the next segment, we'll start with you, Carson. What's your biggest gripe on my list?
I don't even know if I would call it a gripe. I think this is maybe the biggest difference that we have. So you have the Clippers at 4. I had them at 8, but I have very mixed feelings about the Clippers because of the ceiling that we've seen. And like for a time, I thought they were second out west. So why are they still that high for you?
So I think that they were the textbook example of a team that dominated for a few months, and then all their older players went into chill mode. Yeah. And I think that's played a big role. They have some weaknesses. I think they more or less are as good as their record shows, in the sense that like I don't view them as in the Denver Boston tier, whereas like they literally won at a Denver Boston level for a couple of months. Like they were at that level. The thing for me with the Clippers is their weakness to me is foot speed. Like beyond Terrence Mann and Russell Westbrook, most of their guys are relatively slow. James Harden pretty slow. Kawhi Leonard is not a straight line speed guy. Paul George is a finesse pull-up shot maker. Zubac is not particularly slow. So like or particularly fast. So I think that there are certain matchups where they'll struggle, like especially teams that run a lot. That's why they can struggle so much in transition defense. That's why they struggle with defensive rebound, like loose ball situations. They can struggle with speed. But one of their advantages is they're really strong at every position, and they can get into this like physical bully ball type of game. And like, as long as Kawhi Leonard is healthy, he's still a top 3 or 4 playoff player in the league. I like their matchup with Denver as well, as having Zubac that can kind of sort of fight Jokic for position a little bit better than some of the other bigs. My thing with the Clippers is I more or less look at them as closer to the good version of them that we've seen this year, as opposed to the bad version. I also think there's a good chance that Ty Lue just punts on James Harden at some point along this route and goes a different route, maybe with Russell Westbrook, and just leans into just bully ball and tries to cause all sorts of problems there. Paul George, too, is playing some of the best basketball of his career right now at the right time. And so if Paul George keeps that level and Kawhi comes in and brings playoff Kawhi, I think you're dealing with two top 10-ish, top 15-ish players there. So that's pretty much my point of optimism. Do you have any quick counters before we move on to Logan?
Well, I just think it really depends on which version you think you're getting, because like there's no question that they were a top 4 team for more than a third of this season. My concerns are just, number one, Kawhi's health at this stage in the season. Like, he's been so healthy throughout this year, and I'm confident that they're just being conservative and careful, but like him missing 6 games, playoff Kawhi is so unbelievably good. But if you get him for 2 games, like you did against the Suns last year, it doesn't matter. He can soundly outplay KD, soundly outplay Devin Booker. If you only get him for 2 games, it doesn't matter. And you lose. My other concern is just how bad Harden has been, because I think there was a stretch this year where he was playing really well and he was taking advantage of, I'm drawing your 3rd best perimeter defender, and he was facilitating so well. And the facilitating hasn't really changed. It's just been awful shot making. And the fact that he really can't pressure the rim in the same way, and he can't finish around the rim in the same way, which is why he had so many clunkers in last year's playoffs. Of course, his job was way harder, but there's still a volatility there and an inconsistency that concerns me. And his last 15, he's like 13 points per game on 51% true shooting. So it's just tough because the vibes are so bad. And they have been a disaster defensively for 2+ months. I agree with you. To me, that is mostly, hey, our 3 best players are in their early and mid 30s. They're not going to lock in for this stretch of the season. But I still don't love their ceiling there. I think they have the tools to be a good defensive team, not a great one. But I do look at the boxes they check. If Harden is playing well, 3 high-end creators, if Kawhi is out there and healthy, like a top 5 playoff performer sort of guy, they do have the physicality element, but then also this dynamic 3-point shooting. Like, that's why I really like this team for a stretch, but I just worry about all their worst tendencies kind of popping up right before the most important time of year.
You could not be more accurate about that last part. Like every like canned cliche Clipper hate take has like risen to the surface here down the stretch of the season. My one last bit of Clippers optimism, they've got a lot of playoff risers. Kawhi is a playoff riser in my opinion, and then Terrence Mann is a playoff riser in my opinion. His specific archetype in my opinion is one of the most valuable playoff archetypes. It's like that Bruce Brown, like Alex Caruso, Terrence Mann. It's like 6'5", 6'6" guard that's really strong and stocky, that just is an athletic wrecking ball on both ends of the floor. And then even Russell Westbrook is one of those guys where, like, in the prime of his career, I feel like he was a big time playoff dropper because the ball was in his hands so much, and he just was such a bad offensive player when he'd run into like real playoff defense that could expose his limitations. But as in this phase of his career, I almost view him as a playoff riser, because all of a sudden he goes from being like, you know, this kind of like helter-skelter, inconsistent effort guy to like, now he's one of the best athletes on the floor and he's playing his ass off and the ball's not in his hands that much and he's just doing all this dirty work stuff. So that's kind of another point of optimism for me. But again, we're also splitting hairs when we're getting into this stuff. They do also
have James Harden, though. How many playoff risers does he offset with his playoff dropping? Got to be worth at least 2.
Paul George has his history as well, although I think he's better now than he used to be. All right, Logan, what's your biggest bone to pick with my list?
Oh no, we don't even have to go in a different direction here. I want to talk about the Clips too, and we're gonna go more in depth later with Dallas. Jason, I think you hit on the key point on what LA needs to do to move up on my list, because I had them really low. I think if he comes out with a couple of stinkers, I think you have to bench James Harden. And I think LA has the depth where they have guys that can fill in for Harden. Terrence Mann, they have Russell Westbrook, they have Norman Powell. Like, Harden has stunk. Like, I've read off these numbers over the past 15 games. He has been comically bad. 16% from the top of the key, 33% on wing threes, 31% in the corner. And the most alarming numbers to me, he is shooting 27% on catch and shoot threes, 21% on open threes, and 31% on wide open threes. If we get this James Harden in the playoffs, he is unplayable. Like he is going to. Wow, I walked into this one. He's going to sink the Clippers boat, fellas. He is going to sink the Clippers boat. Like that's a real difference maker to me. Because like you said, Jason, Paul George is capital B balling right now. This may be the best version of Paul George I've seen. I just trust Kawhi Leonard to do his thing. I have zero faith in James Harden. And so if he comes out of the gate, I think in game 1 or 2, you know what, Jason, I didn't even think about that. Like James Harden's name brings such a, it just has such weight to it. He's a former NBA MVP. I didn't even think about the Clippers potentially benching him, considering that they traded. I think that's what you got to do. I think that changes my outlook completely for LA. Like James Harden has been that bad. That's why they're that low on my list. Like he sours the Clippers for me. But if they turn to other guards who I trust and they have the depth to do it, that changes the Clips for me. But that's why the Clippers, I think they were 9 on my list, all about Harden. I just have so little faith in Harden turning it around or looking like any different version of a player. They need him to get buckets, and he's not going to pull his weight.
I think you have to try with Harden and then kind of make a read game to game, because when he does have it going, he's a major plus on the offensive end of the floor. But I agree with you. Like I've thought, like I've seen lineups in, for instance, just the game the other night against the Suns, where like you have Paul George, Terrence Mann, and Russell Westbrook all on the floor at the same time, and they're switching. And like there was this possession where the Suns ran like 3 screening actions, and then it ended up with the result was Terrence Mann on Bradley Beal at the top of the key. And you could tell Bradley Beal was like, and he just ended up throwing a random swing pass that just went out of bounds. And I'm like, okay, like this is the advantage, is like they can bring layers of physicality that a lot of other teams can't bring. But I do think you have to try with James Harden. All right, we spent way too long in that segment, so we're going to move on. The NBA season is in full swing, and when I can't get enough of the action on the court, I spice things up betting on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Right now, new customers bet $5 and get $150 instantly in bonus bets. Right now, the championship favorite is the Boston Celtics at plus 190. You can also get the Lakers at plus 3,500. So if you're a believer in their late season run, that is a big number. North Carolina listeners, don't forget DraftKings Sportsbook is now live in your state. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. New customers can bet $5 to get $150 instantly in bonus bets only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code HOOPS. The crown is yours. Moving to the top of the Eastern Conference. In light of the Giannis injury, and apparently based on the MRI, it's been a soleus injury, which is apparently a muscle in your calf that has nothing to do with the Achilles tendon. But even with the rest that he's taking here at the end of the season, his best case scenario is that he gets another like 8 days off before the series actually starts. And especially when it comes to a calf injury, you don't want to mess with the potential future implications involving the Achilles. So I would imagine they're going to take it somewhat cautiously with Giannis. If they do, because that's the other thing too, is this season's been kind of a lost cause anyway, and you have an opportunity potentially through the mid-level exception in the trade market next year to try to make some sort of improvement to the roster and rebuild around Dame and Giannis, right? And if Giannis permanently hurts himself, or not permanently, but substantially hurts himself, that could throw a huge wrench into those plans. This is not a 1-year window. There is another year here where they could try to make this work. And so I think there's a chance he misses the first round. If he does, I don't want to write off the Bucks. They're still a talented team with Dame and Brook Lopez anchoring things, and they have that capability, but they're going to run into a good team in the first round. It's going to be someone like Indiana or Miami or Philadelphia or somebody like that. And like all 3 of those teams, I think without Giannis, I think you have to pick them to beat Milwaukee. So with that being the case, and with the news that Julius Randle is not going to play for the New York Knicks in this playoff run, although the Knicks do look really impressive without Julius Randle still, I'm worried about their firepower up top. So I'm going to pitch this to you first, Logan. Is there any team in the East that is an actual substantial threat to Boston? And if the answer is yes, or I should say, even if it's no, and you had to pick one, who would you pick?
I I would put all of my chips in Boston coming out of the East, but I do think there are still two threats. Also, fun fact, I think the soleus is like the most strong muscle in your body pound
Oh, how
for
about
pound, like in terms of like how small it is in terms of the force you can generate from it. Like I think it's like the like best pound
Some
for pound
soleus
muscle in your
facts
body.
for
Thank
Anyway,
you, Logan.
yeah. um, I hope Giannis is healthy. I do think it is really detrimental to Milwaukee's like championship hopes. Now, we have seen, as you mentioned, Jason, Damian Lillard in games without Giannis, we have seen him, go insane. Just I think he has to go supernova though. You guys can go ahead and call me crazy. You can call me nuts for this one. I still believe in Miami a little bit with their voodoo magic, where I think that again, I think crazy things have to happen. I think a lot of things have to break their right way. There's a little bit of a luck factor. The team that I don't think has to have things break their way as much out east is the Knicks. I have been so absurdly high on the Knicks. And if we had done our contender list like later this week or closer to the playoffs, I think the Knicks might have still cracked my top 10, even without Julius Randle. And it's because of Jalen Brunson. Now, I want to be clear about something. I think the Knicks are better with Julius Randle. They're especially better with good Julius Randle. The size and physicality that you can have with that lineup, with a Hartenstein or a Robinson or Randle, and it's stupid, and then the shooting that you have with these guys, with DiVincenzo shooting the hell out of the pill this year, and what Brunson brings. But it still is the Knicks for me if I really had to get pushed to pick a team. If I want to be clear, if Milwaukee isn't healthy with Giannis, I would take New York. Brunson over this, I think, last 15 game stretch is 35, 3-7 on like 60.5% true shooting. He's leading the league in points per game. And like just those physical advantages. If Jalen Brunson turns into Superman for a playoff run, which I know he is fully and totally capable of, like I fully trust Brunson as my number one in the playoffs. The way he's able to create shots for his teammates, the way this team just plays so cohesively, man. I just love watching the Knicks play. If it's Brunson with a DHO to Anunoby and Anunoby explodes into the paint, if it's Brunson getting into the teeth of the defense, posting up, he gets three defenders looking at him and he dumps off a cut to DiVincenzo. Brunson is an awesome offensive engine. And so that's where my faith with New York starts, but it's everything around them. This team is going to bring the physicality and pain defensively. They are going to play hard all game long. They are going to crash the glass. The Knicks are just going to play really hard on defense, and then Brunson is going to generate great shot quality on offense. So there's a little bit where I like Miami, but if I really had to pick a team and it's not Milwaukee with a healthy Giannis, I still believe in the Knicks a little bit, man. And that's the thing, right? I say the Knicks are better with Julius Randle, but it's almost kind of a benefit a little bit, right, guys? Where it's like, oh, we don't have to worry about Julius Randle, like putting up 10 pull-up mid-range jumpers and clanging them all. It's a double-edged sword where it's like I do think the Knicks are better with great Julius Randle, but they're way worse with really bad Julius Randle. So with the OG Anunoby trade, with them getting Bojan Bogdanovic, where I know he hasn't played great with the Knicks, he's still a great scorer where he could help swing a series with his perimeter shooting. The Knicks are a sneaky, with Brunson playing at this level, I think the Knicks are a sneaky threat out east with a hampered Milwaukee team.
The Knicks would be my second choice to this question. The thing to me, Logan, when you're talking about Randle being a double-edged sword is not that it's untrue. I'm not a Julius Randle guy. I think there are clear things about his skill set being so reliant on the pull-up shooting where he just has these stretches where he goes ice cold. He's super erratic. Questionable playmaking, just sort of black hole tendencies. Like, I don't like Julius Randle. But when you are talking about beating the Celtics, it is about pushing your ceiling to the absolute peak that it can be. And there's no question to me that if the Knicks want to push their ceiling, they would need Julius Randle just because you have to have a second legit shot creator, mismatch attacker. If his pull-up jumpers are falling, Julius Randle could give you an efficient 27, 10, and 6 in a series. And I just think you need that because I do love how the Knicks match up physically here, even without Randle. Like with Randle, then that would be a problem. But still, they're big in the front court. They just have absolute dogs. With OG on the floor, they have a defensive rating of 100 in the year 2024. It is absurd. And they're 18-3 when he plays. I love the supporting cast. I love the depth. The spot up shooting is so much better than last year. And if Jalen Brunson plays like he has been over these last 15 games, then they probably would be the choice. But I just think that sort of singular load on him against a defensive Boston's caliber isn't sustainable. And that's not a Brunson thing. Like, I love Brunson. I think because of his variety as a shot maker, because of how he dominates the paint in the mid range, because of his physicality, like, he scales very well. But you're telling me this guy alone has to deal with a full series of Derek White and Drew Holiday and Jaylen Brown and whatever elite, physical, strong perimeter defender they want to throw at him, and he has no other on-ball threats, really? I just think that that's too much. That's too much to put on him. So that's why they are my second choice, because I do still like a lot of the elements of the formula. Philly, to me, is the team, though, that has the ceiling, because I feel like if you are going to beat Boston, a pretty good box to check, maybe the key box, is just having an unstoppable force on the floor. Like having the guy who is just by head and shoulders the best player out there. It's like the rationale for picking Jokic and the Nuggets. Denver's a really, really good basketball team, better than Philly overall, but they also just have like by far the best player on the floor, and that's why I believe in them. If you think about the 22 finals, this is a much better Boston team, but Steph was just this singular force. And of all the people in the East who have that sort of ceiling, if we're taking Giannis out of it, like Embiid is clearly the guy to me. I don't care about his playoff resume. I do care about his playoff resume, but if you're just talking about who has the most ability, who has like the combination of overwhelming physical traits and skilled shot making and can dominate defensively to just completely lap everybody else out there on the floor, Embiid has that ceiling. And then with Melton back, I think they have a pretty nice collection of perimeter defenders. Their spot up shooting is okay. If Maxey explodes, like he has been volatile this year, there's been some up and down stretches, but if he's knocking down his pull-up jumpers consistently, it's a tough matchup having to deal with this collection of Boston perimeter defenders, and especially they're so big and physical. But like if Maxey is just dialed in, there's a ceiling there because of the star power that I don't see anybody else out East reaching. And there's a reason that Philly is 30-8 when Joel Embiid plays, and it's because mostly he's been that overwhelmingly great, and they've put a nice complementary supporting cast. And I know that he's struggled historically against Boston, and Horford has been like the Embiid stopper, but if his jumper's falling, that to me was the biggest issue in last year's playoff series between the two of them. He just couldn't make a jumper. I think if that skilled shot making holds up, then the ceiling is the roof for him, and that just gives Philly more upside than anybody else to me.
So I look at there being three potential threats here. And for the record, per our sponsor, DraftKings, the Celtics are currently minus 170 to win the Eastern Conference. So the DraftKings views Boston basically as unthreatened in the Eastern Conference. I more or less feel the same way. If I had to pick one, though, when I look at those three options, and the three options to me are the Knicks, the Bucks, and the Sixers, all three of them, when they're healthy, I think present a moderate threat to Boston. When I say moderate, meaning like capable of winning, even though you're obviously picking Boston. For Milwaukee, the case is they're literally the best lineup in the league when they're healthy. Minimum 400 minutes. They're outscoring teams by 15 points per 100 possessions, which is literally the best net rating in the league for a lineup that's played that much. For the Knicks, the case is like when Julius Randle's healthy, you have a secondary shot creator. And I love how you have to differentiate between good and bad Julius, because like when Julius has a long runway and is in rhythm, he's actually a pretty solid player, brings some physical stuff to the game. When he's out of rhythm, he's kind of bad. Like that's kind of like more or less the difference between the two. But without the thing with the Knicks is like all year long, they've been one of the most likable and high character teams in the league. They play so hard. They play so physical. They do all of these things well. Jalen Brunson is legitimately a superstar, or a fringe superstar, in my opinion. He's clearly one of the top 15 players in the league, in my opinion, after this season. Has had a much better season than Damian Lillard, for instance. He's kind of like taken that spot away from him in terms of the regular season. But there's a certain talent limitation, and you see that when they play their tougher opponents. They're just 7-17 this year against the teams that are in the top 10 in point differential for cleaning the glass. They are the fourth worst defense in those matchups, giving up 123.4 points per 100 possessions. A lot of small guards on the floor that the really good offenses find a way to attack. So the way that I look at it, like New York to me is like, if they nail their summer, they're going to be a bona fide championship contender next year. I really do feel that way. The thing with Philly, because I agree with you, Carson, like, what if Embiid just goes on a wrecking ball run has always been the case for the upside on when it comes to Philly. However, if I had to pick a season for Embiid to break through in that way, it wouldn't be a situation like this where he's coming back from a meniscus in April to try to get a ramp up and go. Like, I just don't think he has the runway to suddenly figure out his playoff issues that he's had in the past. They're undefeated since he returned to the lineup against Oklahoma City Thunder, but outside of the Thunder game, and the Thunder did sit a bunch of guys in that game, they really haven't played anybody. So I mean, Embiid's look fine, but it's hard to really interpret anything from that. So if I had to pick an example of a threat, if I had to, the case would be Milwaukee gets some sort of favorable first round matchup. Like, let's say Miami gets through, and Miami obviously is kind of an exposer of fraudulent teams, and I'd probably still pick Miami to win that series. But let's say that you just ride the home crowd, because Milwaukee's been like one of those teams that can be kind of a buzzsaw at home. They go up 2-0, they go down to Miami, they steal one. Dame goes for 45 in game 5, and they win. Okay. At that point, let's say Giannis returns in May, and you more or less have the team that we've seen their top 5 be so dominant. I just think of all of the potential outcomes, that is the most realistic, is that somehow Milwaukee survives the first round, then they get Giannis back. And Giannis is not Embiid. He does not need a runway. That dude walks on the court and is 32 and 15. So like that kind of is more or less how I see the case. For a team, but I don't necessarily see a threat to Boston, a legitimate threat in the Eastern Conference. All right, let's move out to the bottom of the West. So the play-in can go in a million different directions based on tonight. Tonight has some crazy showdowns. So we have the Suns at the Kings, the Pelicans at the Warriors, and the Lakers at the Grizzlies. And the Lakers will be heavy favorites against the Grizzlies, but the Grizzlies had a 3-game winning streak this month, including they went into Milwaukee and beat the Bucks with Giannis, although without Dame. So like the Grizzlies are feisty. They're not necessarily a complete write-off in that game. But to explain the kind of a play-in situation for everybody who doesn't understand it, the Lakers, the Kings, and the Warriors are all tied right now. But the Lakers, no matter what, are losing the tiebreaker in those situations. The only team they have a tiebreaker over is the Phoenix Suns. Also, all 3 of those teams are out of striking distance of the New Orleans Pelicans, so they cannot get up to the 6th seed. The best they can all hope for is 7. Now, if the Suns beat the Kings tonight and the Pelicans beat the Warriors tonight and the Lakers beat the Grizzlies tonight, so all 3 road teams win, the Lakers will move into that 8th spot, and then we'll end up with the Kings Warriors at the bottom. When we get to Sunday's games, they're all more straightforward. There's the Lakers at Pelicans. That's a tough game. But Suns at Minnesota, that's a tough one for the Suns because the Wolves are probably going to be fending off Oklahoma City at that point and need to win that game. And Minnesota at home in a must-win game, you're probably going to pick them there. But the Warriors have an easy game at home against the Jazz, and the Kings have an easy game at home against the Blazers. So if the Kings and Warriors win tonight against the Suns and the Pelicans, then the Lakers will probably end up at 10. So like it could go in all of these different directions. So I don't even want to try to like sort out who's going to end up where, because that's just, to me, a complete and total crapshoot. So I look at it like this. I think all of these teams, except for the Pelicans and the Kings, meaning the Suns, the Lakers, and the Warriors, are teams that have legitimate threat to go make some noise in the postseason. So the way you look at it is, if you're for real, you got to be able to go win this 1-game sample to be able to get into the postseason. No different than winning a game 6 when you're down 3-2 and you got to go on the road, or winning a game 7 if it's a series that's tied, right? Like, it's playoff basketball at this point. So from that standpoint, let's just look at the strengths of the teams. Who do we think are going to be the 7 and the 8 seeds when the dust settles from all of this? And I'm not talking about which one goes where. I'm just saying who's going to be in those spots. Who's going to be 6? Who's going to be 7? Who's going to be 8? Carson, you go first.
So I'm going to predict that the Pels stay at 6, even though they do have like 2 competitive games remaining. I think the Suns are at 7 because they do have this advantage in terms of record. And you said we don't want to get too into the particulars of the matchups, but if they had anybody other than the Lakers in that 7-8, like I would pick them, then I just think the ceiling they do have because of their shot creation, their offensive skill, the level they can defend at when they're engaged is not the highest, but I like that formula. The Kings to me are just like a clear weakest out of this group, especially post Herter, but especially Malik Monk injuries. Like since he went down, they're 3-5. They've looked very uninspiring. I just think like the dribble penetration, the shot making, the playmaking he brings is super important. So I kind of rule them out. And then for the 8 seed, Lakers Warriors, I do still believe in the Lakers more. The Warriors are playing really good basketball. They are playing their best basketball of the year. They are defending at a high level. It feels like all of the key players outside of maybe Steph, who like hasn't been his best, but are just kind of in rhythm right now. You've gotten a more aggressive, consistent Wiggins, but the Lakers are a brutal matchup for the Warriors because of their overwhelming size advantage. And I think that, of course, it was a different iteration last year because they also had much better answers in terms of point of attack defense for Steph Curry, and they were able to just kind of hassle him throughout that series. Even though he still dictated things, they don't have that sort of point of attack defender healthy and available right now at the very least. But I just think AD is a problem for the Warriors. They have not had an answer for him whatsoever on the interior, on the glass, and defensively, like in a single game or in a playoff environment. He's the guy who I want most on the planet. Same goes for like single game LeBron, who offensively, since the All-Star break, has been so absurdly good, over 27-9 on 67% true shooting. And I just think, like, when it comes down to it, he's going to hunt the mismatches he wants. He's going to get what he wants at will. When he is shooting like this, what a lethal offensive player. So to me, the Lakers just have more firepower. They have 2 superstars. The Warriors have 1, and they have 1 who I still absolutely believe in, but has been more erratic as of late than really any stretch in recent memory. But it's ultimately about the offensive burden that Steph bears and the lack of shot creation around him, where even if you didn't have crazy LeBron, like, would you be shocked if D'Lo and Austin Reeves combined for 45? Of course not. Like, they're totally capable of doing that. And then I still like the Lakers the most in terms of playoff prospects out of all of these play-in teams. I just think their path, they're probably going to have to come from that 9-10 game. It may be that they don't, but it just feels like these teams are going to be playing so hard. I think the Kings maybe end up in the 10, but I like the Lakers more than the Warriors, and so I would go Suns and Lakers in the 7 and 8.
I'd also go Suns and Lakers. I think LA, if they have to travel again, I don't want to get too much into theoreticals. If they have to go to Golden State, I think that's a tough draw first round. But as I know you've mentioned, Jason, I think it was a social clip a couple of weeks ago. You know, the Lakers have been a great team with their backs against the wall, against great competition. They're always going to be super physical. They're always going to be great on the glass. And then, like what Carson said, you got AD and LeBron, man. I can bank on those guys handling business. And it really is sad that the Lakers have dug themselves this hole and they've made this bed for themselves. I don't know. It's funny. You were talking to Jason, I think last show, or about the stretch after the in-season tournament. And it was like after they won the in-season tournament, it was like, all right, guys, let's take the foot off the gas, man. We already did it. You know, we're gonna be great come playoff time. They took that stretch for granted. I still do believe in the Lakers. And then, yeah, in one game scenarios, I think Golden State, the role players have been playing better. I think Steph has to go crazy. And I'm not saying that's not possible, but they're a slight team, been inconsistent. I don't believe in Sacramento. I'm a Kings fan, but without Herter and Monk, it's tough. The Kings seem to have the Lakers number, though. So I think, I don't know. I think Kings Lakers is going to be a really interesting matchup. Just Sabonis is so strong. Like, he's just physical. He matches up with AD really well. But I'm going to err on the side of the teams with 2 superstars. The Suns have KD and D-Book, and I think they are going to go crazy. And then the Lakers have LeBron and AD. It's ironic that, you know, at the end of the day, that's what it's going to come down to. Is I'm just going to trust the teams with the most superstar talent to propel themselves. So Yeah, I would take Phoenix probably in the 7th spot, and then LA in the
Yeah,
8th spot.
I got this on social, but I didn't have a chance to say it on the show. These were the crazy Lakers stats that I found the other day. During the 3-10 stretch after the in-season tournament when Darvin Ham was playing, Cam Reddish and Taurean Prince 59.2 minutes per game. During the same span, Rui Hachimura and Jared Vanderbilt were barely playing 40 minutes a game. D'Lo was playing the same amount of minutes as Cam Reddish. This is the haymaker though. In over 2,600 possessions, with Cam Reddish and Taurean Prince off the floor this season, the Lakers have a plus 9.3 net rating per cleaning the glass, which for perspective, and again, this is never apples to apples because the Timberwolves have played some bad lineups this year too, but the Timberwolves have the second best net rating in the league basically at plus 7. So to give you an idea, the Lakers, if you just remove the Cam Reddish and Taurean Prince minutes, have performed like a bona fide championship contender in a massive, massive sample size. That's how much of a catastrophe that specific issue has been, which is why I have still to this day, I had another tweet yesterday, like why is he talking about a 10 seed in the Western Conference? And it's like people just they struggle to sift through that. Especially the Western Conference to me, again, even the Warriors to me belong in the same conversations as these other teams in the West. They probably deserve to be at the bottom of that list, but the thing with the Warriors is they haven't been very good against the good teams in the league this year. That's their main kind of gripe that you have to point to. The Lakers have 17 wins against teams in the top 10 in point differential, which is the best, tied with Oklahoma City for the most in the league, and they are 5th in point differential against the teams that are in the top 10 in point differential. So the Lakers have been consistently good against the good teams in the league this year. Here's kind of how I look at this situation if I had to predict what's going to happen. The Warriors are really good, especially playing against limited teams or teams that I don't think are particularly good. For instance, the Pelicans, their starting 5 with CJ McCollum and Herb Jones and Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson and Jonas Valanciunas, that starting 5 has a negative net rating this year somehow. They're just, to me, the Pelicans have always been the most fraudulent of those teams that are consistently in the mix there in the Western Conference. So I think that the Warriors will beat the Pelicans tonight at home. And again, Pelicans can win that game. I'm not trying to write them off. They put length on Steph. Steph has a rough night. Other guys don't make shots. They could very easily lose that game. But I'm going to pick the Warriors tonight. I do think the Suns will go into Sacramento and beat the Kings. So that would put the Lakers up into the 9 spot, the Warriors into the 8 spot, and the Kings down at the 10 spot. From there, if the Lakers beat the Pelicans and the Suns beat Minnesota, that would be the ideal outcome for the Lakers, because that would kick the Suns up into the 6th seed and the Pelicans at the 7. The Lakers would still be at 9, but then the Lakers would have a home game against the Kings, and then they would get to play the loser of Golden State versus the Pelicans, which I think are better matchups for them. The Lakers did get their butt kicked by the Suns the last time they played them, so that could be a little bit of a concern. The Kings have been a bad matchup for the Lakers, but without Malik Monk in the equation, they can key in on De'Aaron Fox more, and I just think it gives them a substantially better chance of winning that game. So that I think is the most likely outcome. I don't think the Suns will necessarily beat Minnesota. That's a tough one. And the problem is like if Oklahoma City beats Milwaukee tonight and Minnesota beats Atlanta tonight and Denver beats San Antonio tonight, then Minnesota and Oklahoma City both need to win on Sunday to maintain their standing, or if Oklahoma City, that is still in flux for the 2-3. And that obviously is home court advantage for the conference semi. So that's a substantial reward that you're fighting for there. And both of those teams are going to want home court advantage because they're young, they're athletic, they feed on their defense, so on and so forth. So looking at it from that perspective, I think the Wolves will beat the Suns. So my best guess is we'll have Pelicans at 6, and then it'll be Suns Warriors in the 7-8 game in Phoenix. And then it'll be Lakers Kings in the 9-10 game. I think the Lakers will beat the Kings. I think Suns Warriors could go either way. But regardless of who wins that game, I would pick the Lakers to win on the road against the loser of that game. So it's going to either be Pelicans Suns Lakers or Pelicans Warriors Lakers is my best guess. If I had to pick, gun to my head right now, I'm going to go Pelicans Suns Lakers as the 6, 7, 8 right now. So that was a mouthful. That was a very, very confusing type of situation, but that's kind of the way I see it breaking down. And then we have a good chance of seeing Lakers Nuggets in the first round, which would be at least for that, at least if I'm LeBron there, and I'd rather face the Nuggets later on, but if I'm LeBron there, I'm sitting there thinking like at least we'll find out right away off the start here. I won't have to go through a month-long war with somebody before we see the Nuggets. So